This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome. Good morning. It is fantastic to see so many new and returning faces. Welcome to the March monthly partnership meeting of the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership, or SCDRP for short. My name is Heather McCarthy, and I have the distinct privilege to serve as the Executive Director of SCDRP. A warm welcome to all of you today from Jacksonville, Florida. I'll share my screen. Can you see? There we are. So here's the agenda for today. First, I'll share with you our SCDRP outreach avenues and reveal some of our recent SCDRP upgrades. The next 20-30 minutes will be dedicated to our guest speakers. And then after today's super speakers, I will share a few upcoming SCDRP happenings, including more information about committees. Our committee sign-up deadline is today, March 23rd, project sketches, and a sneak peek at our April super speaker. And then we will round out the hour with our tradition of partner sharing. So while folks continue to trickle in, let's highlight SCDRP's outreach avenues and some behind the scenes upgrades. First, we have our newsletter. Please sign up via our website or use this QR code. We don't send out newsletters that often, so we won't bombard your inbox too much. They come out about every other week. And of course, the other major way we reach out to you is through our monthly partnership meetings. We meet virtually every month on the fourth Thursday at 10 a.m. The meeting link is the same every month, and about half of our hour will feature a webinar or spotlight speakers. The other half of the hour is devoted to resource sharing and discussions, and examples include important policy legislation, funding updates, regional updates, research announcements, best management practices, and of course, job opportunities in resilience-related fields. Also, don't forget to follow us on our social media outlets to reach new partners and to share timely and relevant information much more frequently than our bi-monthly newsletters. We utilize our social media outlets, and here they are. So you can get out your phone, scan this QR code, or click on this Linktree link on your computer, and both of these will take you to a link tree of ways to reach us and connect with us. And these include our SCDRP website, how to become a member, our YouTube recordings, and of course, our LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. So our most popular social media outlet is LinkedIn. So if you haven't found us on LinkedIn yet, please do. So our program coordinator, Josephine Justin, wave Josephine. She's responsible for our social media presence. So please email or tag her if you have new ideas or news to post. Our YouTube channel is also a great resource. Remember, the recordings of each session of the SCDRP 2023 annual meeting are available on our YouTube channel. A big thanks again to our program coordinator, Josephine, for splicing together the speakers' faces with their slides. And this was a massive endeavor with massive files. So well done, Josephine. In fact, just this week, I also reviewed the recording of session 3 with our invited Caribbean panelist. And I also reviewed the recording of our January in-person monthly partnership meeting to kind of remind me what are your goals and suggestions for SCDRP in 2023. There are some golden nuggets in these videos that we must continue to elevate throughout the year. So please follow this tiny URL link listed here for access to all videos. And Josephine has also compiled a photo gallery. This is a collection of photos from Miami, and she has made them available to everyone via the web address listed here. Some SCDRP upgrades that you may not be aware of. We have new CRM software specifically designed for nonprofits that is now working for us. And this is huge to me and Josephine. It consolidates all of our organizational data in one place. It allows us to better track memberships and sponsorships, and it streamlines our workflow and automates many tasks for us. So this is behind the scenes mostly, but it does mean huge things for SCDRP because staff can do more in less time, right? So right after we got back from Miami, Josephine and I kind of jumped into learning how to use this new powerful software and began migrating our data over. So from your perspective, you will see changes in our website, changes in how memberships are purchased, and those subtle differences in our newsletters and emails. And now you will have access to member-only features like an SCDRP member directory, where you can create and edit your own personal account, update your contact information, and check the status of your membership. You can also opt in to have your name, affiliation, and email address available to other members. So we're very excited about this. We have two guest speakers today, Dr. Ashley Ward and Jessica Sheldon from Duke Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. In conjunction with the SCDRP 2023 annual meeting in Miami, Ashley and her colleagues organized and facilitated a roundtable discussion between invited resilience officers and emergency managers. And today, they will present the findings of that unique convening. The title of their talk today is Aligning Resilience Planning with Disaster Response, Duke University Roundtable. First, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ashley Ward, who joins us today from Durham, North Carolina. I have a lot to say about Ashley, so bear with me here. Ashley serves as the Senior Policy Associate for Engagement and Outreach at Duke Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. Ashley is a climate health and resilience professional. Her career has focused on engaging communities to identify and address issues related to climate change and helping communities develop long-term sustainable strategies relevant to their community needs. Her previous work with NOAA's Carolinas RISA is RISA, Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessment Team, connected rural and urban communities and policy decision makers with relevant climate and health data, particularly related to vulnerabilities and impacts. Engagement with communities across the Carolinas revealed a knowledge and access gap in climate data, wherein many communities did not have the necessary data and expertise to inform decision-making, planning, and preparedness. So Ashley and her colleagues at CISA, that's Carolina's Integrated Sciences and Assessments, worked with those community stakeholders to develop a suite of open access web-based tools to address these issues. Ashley has continued to bridge the gap between science, data, policy, and community as Senior Policy Associate at Duke's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, Sustainability. So in this role, Ashley works with communities, public agencies, and policymakers to create and inform effective policy solutions to difficult environmental challenges. In addition to work on health impacts of climate extremes, Ashley has worked on the Internet of Water project. David is also from the Internet of Water project, helping public agencies modernize their water data infrastructure to better manage water resources. On the Internet of Water team, Ashley leads the stakeholder and policy engagement, the pilot programs, and the development of the Technology Adoption Program, or TAP, designed to guide public agencies through the organizational and behavioral changes needed to modernize their water data infrastructure. And Ashley is currently leading the design and development of a climate health initiative for the Nicholas Institute. Now, here at SCDRP, we are very fortunate that Ashley has brought all of her experiences and expertise to us as she begins her first term serving on the SCDRP Advisory Board. And we thank Ashley for volunteering her time in this leadership role to advance the mission of SCDRP. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Jessica Sheldon, who will be assisting Ashley during her presentation today. Jessica, Jessica also joins us from Durham, North Carolina. Jessica works as a graduate research assistant. Oh, excuse me. Jessica is a current Master of Environmental Management, or MEM, graduate student at Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment. She currently works as a graduate research assistant for Ashley in the Nicholas Institute, developing a state of the nation assessment for extreme heat mitigation preparedness. Jessica is pursuing her MEM degree with a concentration in water resource management with a certificate in community-based environmental management. She is also earning a certificate in natural hazard resilience planning from UNC Chapel Hill's School of Urban and Regional Planning. Prior to Duke, Jessica earned her bachelor's degree from Rice University in Houston, Texas, studying environmental earth science and researching how drone photogrammetry, did I say that right? Okay, could be used to assess flood risk. Ah, very interesting. So Jessica today is the envy of her classmates, as she has already secured a professional position and it's waiting for her. After graduation from Duke in May, she will join WSP in their Raleigh office as a water resource engineer. Congratulations, Jessica. So it is my pleasure to present Dr. Ashley Ward. I will now make you a presenter.
Well, that was quite the intro, Heather. Thank you.
Yes, I have to give all credit where credit is due. Okay.
Okay. All right. How is this? Is everybody seeing the slides? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this roundtable. This was the first time we'd done such a roundtable at the SCDRP meeting, and I see there are a couple of people on the call today that attended the roundtable, and for us, we certainly intend on doing it, repeating it again. It was such a success. And so I think because there are several on the call here, and many of you were not in the roundtable, I want to kind of first take a little step back and just kind of give some background on the purpose of the roundtable and the origin of it. So the Nicholas Institute should not be confused with the Nicholas School of Environment at Duke. The Nicholas School of Environment, their mission is research and education. It was established through, a gift from the Nicholas family to the university. Not long after that gift was made and the Nicholas School of Environment was launched, the Nicholas family realized that there also not only needed to be research and education, but also a policy arm that would ensure that that research was transitioned, developed into effective sustainable policy toward some of our trickiest environmental problems. And so they gave a second gift to the university to form the Nicholas Institute. And our focus here at the Nicholas Institute is policy innovation. We are two separate units, though we have the same name, so I know it's confusing. And not as if we do some research right here at the Institute, particularly as it pertains to policy development, but that's our focus is effective, innovative policy development and helping agencies and organizations implement those policies. So one of the big things that we do here at the Institute, and I think is one of the reasons I really love working here and what we do, is we convene a lot. Now, the purpose of these convenings is to bring together people to the table who maybe perhaps don't get to sit together very often and have facilitated, designated time to discuss some of these thorny issues. But objective of these kinds of convenings is it's great to serve as an entry point also, because there are lots of people who are part of the convenings that you may not necessarily think that, oh, this is, directly what they do, right? Answering this question is directly what they do. But in fact, their work is adjacent to whatever the problem is we're addressing. So when we hold one of these convenings, we're very carefully construct who is sitting at the round table so that we can have the deepest, most robust conversation that crosses over a lot of different sectors and helps us all reach a better understanding, not just of the problems, but also really start thinking about what the solutions are. And we are solutions oriented. I also find the convenings are a wonderful and powerful way to connect people with communities in which their decisions are actually impact those communities. So we really try and bring together a diverse body of people. And so we were thrilled to partner with the SCDRP and hold this roundtable discussion at the conclusion of their annual meeting in Miami. This came about because, and some of the Aspen Institute earlier in the fall held a disasters roundtable. And from that and from other engagements that we had been having around resilience, particularly in the water space, there was a lot of conversation about how difficult it is to get resilience professionals and disaster professionals at the table together and really have a conversation about the merging of sort of disaster preparedness and planning with resilience planning as well. And so we approached Heather and the SCDRP with this idea and launched this roundtable. I want to first kind of talk about what it is. Sorry, I need to click. So what is it that we discussed in the roundtable? This is a little bit of an overview of the two big topics. We had two sessions of discussion. The first, trying to capture very recent lessons learned. And we set this at 5 years because we wanted to be sure we were capturing, the lessons that have been learned with all of the events that have happened most recently. We wanted to not sort of go back and rehash decades of lessons learned. So we really sort of put a boundary on this. And, these are some of the questions that we asked participants ahead of time to think through, which is, what have you learned recently about the events that you're experiencing, but also the corresponding recovery? And are there aspects to resilience that we're missing? And how do these two sectors, resilience professionals, emergency management professionals, how do they coordinate in your community what works and what doesn't work? And what is the role of other actors like universities and nonprofits in this space to help further the ongoing resilience strategies in these communities? So we spent the first half of the day talking about this question, really working through this question. And the second half of the roundtable was spent digging into the questions around funding and financing resilience. It's really important that we take a moment to define what we mean by those two things. When we say funding, what we're talking about is basically grants. And when we say financing, we're talking largely loans, right? So we talked a lot about, and really this was a wonderful, I hated to see this conversation end. It was really a great conversation around, financing mechanisms to build resilience. What are the barriers that communities face? And what are the policy and technical solutions that are available to us to address these barriers? And so when we start all of the roundtables, we lay out a set. I'm going over this so that hopefully in the future, when an invitation goes out to future roundtables, if you receive it, you'll have a good idea about what you're signing up for. And so all of our roundtables follow Chatham House rules, which means we do not identify what any individual says in the roundtable. This is very important because we invite people to the roundtable that, for example, work in public agencies. And our aim is to create a space in which people can honestly communicate without fear of this being shared outside of the roundtable. It's a closed room. There's no audio or video recording. We do take notes, detailed notes, so that we can have them and process them into key takeaways. But not only do we not attribute anything that's said to a certain person, we make sure that anything that's typed also doesn't make it obvious about who said whatever it is that was said. And we ask all the participants in the room that if they're going to share anything via Twitter or social media or with any of their colleagues, that they also follow the rules of non-attribution. And so it's a really important part of what we do. And I think that has enabled us to learn an awful lot in really honest conversations and sometimes difficult conversations. And so I'm excited today to kind of share with you our key takeaways from this roundtable, and then also talk with you about what we're planning for next year's roundtable. I'd love to hear if anyone here has some ideas too. And so Jessica and I are going to kind of tag team. I'm going to talk about the sort of the big summary of the key takeaway, and Jessica's going to jump in and talk a little bit about some specific examples from the conversation. So the first key takeaway that we've observed was that, and this is probably not going to be a surprise for many of you, that there are substantial existing federal funds, and particularly with the passage of the new policies from the Biden administration with the CHIPS Act, the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, substantial federal funds available to address resilience. However, getting access to those funds remains one of the most significant barriers that particularly communities face. And the communities that are most in need of the funds are the ones that usually have the least access to the funds. And this is in large part because there is such fragmentation of these programs across different federal agencies, but also the application process to access these funds can be very cumbersome and difficult and lack consistency in the criteria that is required, and it's also not transferable. And so we have this complex system that is responsible for delivering this enormous investment that has been made from the federal government. And what everybody in the room, I think, really agreed upon was the need to ensure that the people who most need those funds have easy, available access to those funds. And so, Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of elaborate on that.
Great. Great. All right. So one of the major barriers that was discussed in the conversation was capacity. So that could be capacity of smaller local governments, or that a director is regional and they're working alone or with a small team, and they run into issues of applying to these large programs that, as Ashley mentioned, have extensive application processes. So the capacity serves as a primary barrier. A second example that was raised was that consultants often cannot bid on the projects that they help to a community to create, which could disincentivize them from helping communities, many with this limited capacity, which creates a barrier. There was also consensus from the group that there is definitely lots of funding out there, either currently existing or that is coming down here in the future. But many counties are still working through or wrapping up COVID relief funding and are at risk to being overwhelmed and missing opportunity due to funding fatigue and this limited capacity. The uncertainty of how to access the funds or who is eligible for different funding also creates a major barrier for access.
And one of the things that, as far as the solutions side goes, that's been raised both in previous roundtables, but also came up in this one, was the need for some kind of common app around federal funding to access these funds, some kind of application that would streamline the process and perhaps allow applicants to transfer information from one grant application to another, so they wouldn't have to repeat over and over again some of the same information. I do know that there are several folks who have, picked up this idea and I also know that in circles on Capitol Hill that this has been something that is circulated. In fact, there's been some talk of a legislation that would establish such a thing. I don't know the status of what that looks like, but I do think it's something that collectively would be, a solution that together we could push toward. I mean, there are resources within the federal government that are charged with helping, public interest technologists who are in charge with helping the public um, access the resources that are available through the federal government. So I think that's certainly one potential solution to this challenge that would be great to see some coordinated effort at pushing. A second key takeaway is really about deploying existing vehicles for funding that currently exist. And so I thought this was a really interesting take from one of our participants. And basically, the point was made that there are lots of mechanisms through things like building permitting fees, property taxes, fees for forms, small additions, even very small additions to these existing structure create a mechanism for revenue collection that could generate revenue for community resilience projects. I also heard something similar to this in some work we did in New Mexico some time back, and they had talked about the fact that they had an application fee when someone applied to get some kind of document. That was still just $1 because that fee had not changed in decades. And so one of the things they had proposed that they could do at the agency level that would not require state legislative approval is increasing that fee marginally to something like $5. And so, this is something that is actually a potential. It varies by where you live because in some cases, any kind of addition to a fee or anything like that requires some kind of legislative approval. In other cases, it just requires agency head approval. But this is something that I think is a key takeaway that's, also a solution. Jessica?
So, as Ashley mentioned, examples of this type of existing vehicle include possibly a resiliency impact fee or some kind of small nominal all hazard tax on homeowners. And the importance of this was discussed that developing a funding source at the local level, such as these examples, is key because community resilience can't be built on grants. That was something that was discussed several times throughout the conversation. And often funding takes a long time to trickle down to the local level. So these types of mechanisms would provide a ready source of funding for recovery.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that, Jessica. I loved that comment that was made is that community resilience can't be built upon grants. I thought that was really a great moment in the roundtable. Okay, third, this one is, this takeaway, state, local, and community leadership need greater knowledge about financing opportunities. So they can bring the needed capital for resilience projects and including the potential role of credit agencies. This came up largely in the SCDRP conference as well. And this key takeaway actually provides the basis for one of our future topics. And I found that this was one of the topics that was both really difficult for participants to think through and navigate through and to really know all of the have all the information they need. So there's lots of need for further discussion upon this just from learning from those in the financing industry. But also there was some real confusion or around sort of the challenges that are presented, particularly around the metrics for how this type of financing is determined. And Heather, I remember in one of the sessions for the SCDRP, a great example came up from our partners in the Caribbean, and that was a lot of the special financing that is available to states in the Caribbean, for example, rely upon per capita wealth metrics. And because there is such an enormous gap in wealth, where you have a few individuals, a small percent of the population there that hold an enormous amount of wealth, and for those that also, on the other end of that spectrum, large numbers of people who are low resource and poor, what ends up happening, though, is those small few basically bump the average up so that in fact, there's only one Caribbean nation that qualifies for special financing, and that's Haiti. What that means, though, is that all of the other nations are subject to enormous interest rates. So, 18 and 20% interest rates on financing, which cripples their ability to get financing because they can't afford to pay it back. And so the example that was given by our partners from the Caribbean was, let's just say there's a $50,000 loan that needs to be taken and to build something back to the way it was. But to build something back newly resilient, more resilient, would be $80,000. That $30,000 difference at an 18 or 20% interest rate means that that is no longer an option. And so it perpetuates this cycle of building back in high risk areas, or not being able to incorporate resilient practices into these recovery moments of recovery. And so I felt like this was, honestly, for me personally, but I think for a lot of folks in the room, it was a moment where we said, okay, we need to engage differently with representatives from the financing industry, both to understand which products are available, but also to help those same participants understand the challenges that their policies create when it comes to communities being able to actually finance resilience. Jessica?
As Ashley mentioned, there was definitely kind of a gap in this understanding. So my example for this takeaway would be the lack of examples that we had in this conversation. And as Ashley mentioned, this is what is leading us into our potential topic for next year, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of our presentation.
I also thought this one was really interesting. So this really talks, and I've heard folks talk about this a lot, but I think we kind of talked about this slightly differently in the roundtable, which is the lack of a common vocabulary creates barriers across resilience and disaster professions, but also across different government. And so I'm going to let Jessica give the examples here, but key terms basically sort of indicate different ways of thinking between resilience professionals and disaster professionals. And the lack of a common vocabulary actually means that when people try and apply for funding, how, say, resilience is defined at the federal level may be different than how a community defines resilience, and this actually becomes a barrier in accessing funding. And that incompatibility around language confuses communities who are trying to apply for funding, and it also creates an awful lot of frustration on their part. Jessica, there were so many examples of this in the roundtable, so I'm going to let you jump right in with the examples.
Right, so I tried to boil down some of the examples into key themes. In general, as the terms disaster, resilience, and mitigation become more frequently used, the difference in these definitions at the different levels becomes exacerbated. So, for example, resilience. The resiliency partnership and resiliency funds. Does it mean to build back to what you had prior to a disaster, or does resilience mean to get rid of what you had and build new, different infrastructure that could withstand future disasters? And this type of difference in understanding or difference in definition could lead to completely different designs and proposals and the funding received on these designs and proposals. Additionally, these terms often mean different things to different communities. The way that a community defines resilience, for example, resilience to food insecurity could reflect the way that they apply to a grant and the way then that the federal agency denies this funding because they don't see that as resiliency. So we understand and we talked about, well, creating this kind of common vocabulary could limit the terms. However, it could also lead to less frustration um, in the proposals and moving forward.
Yes, great. And I see the question in the chat, and I'm going to circle back to that at the when we talk about future stuff. It's a great question. Okay, and the last key takeaway was really about I think during the process of the roundtable, it became obvious that there was a misconception between different people in different sectors about what the role is, and particularly the limitations of the roles of federal agencies in their mission and scope. And so this, often led when it came to practice about a misconception in services that were available through the federal government agencies, and therefore a lack of planning and preparedness at the state and local level. And so this was really felt most acutely in the aftermath of disasters, which is the context in which it came up in the roundtable. But one of the takeaways from this was the need to, and to be frank, the need for federal agencies to very clearly define where their mission and mandate begins and where it ends, and help people at the state and local level and communities even communicate about where those boundaries are. I think one of the things, for example, that we saw in the news that recently was the train derailment in East Palestine and Ohio. One of the first things that happened in the media was, "Where's FEMA?" And in fact, there were two things that happened there. There wasn't a lot of property damage when that happened. So that doesn't necessarily automatically kick in FEMA's disaster declaration at the way that the disaster declarations are defined. But second, FEMA comes in at the request of state and local governance. And that was something that becomes a big point of misconception in the public, but also we found in our roundtable among people who actually work in local governance and state government. And so I think one of the takeaways from this is the need to really clearly define where those boundaries are, and make sure that everyone is understanding where they are, so that when we're communicating, particularly to the general public, we don't perpetuate a misunderstanding about what roles different agencies play. Jessica?
Right, so these misconceptions of jurisdiction are potentially dangerous because they can lead to individual, state frustration and a slow recovery following a disaster. Some of these misconceptions were highlighted in our conversation as representatives talked about the roles that they can fill versus what they see states and individuals calling them for their role to be, and their frustration because they can't fill those gaps. Also, through many different threads of our conversation, it was identified that this gap from misconception occurs at many different levels of government, and as well as pre and post disaster. So some of these examples of misconceptions include funding timelines, aid jurisdiction, funding amounts, and program eligibility.
So again, these key takeaways, what we've done is try to synthesize, several hours of conversation into 5 key takeaways. So, because of that, it is certainly a simplified version of it. But I think, this gives you an idea, though. I think one of the objectives of these roundtables certainly is for us to learn from the professionals in the room, for them to learn from each other, but it provides a great entry point for people to work with each other who normally would not have ever maybe even met or taught with each other. And so we look to find partnerships and work that happens out of these roundtables as well. And for us going forward, there definitely were 2 topics that, as the chat has already revealed, right, needs deeper consideration and some really thoughtful discussion, not only among different levels of government, but also bringing professionals from the financing industry and the insurance industry. One of the big things that came up a lot was different ways of risk transfer versus risk reduction, and the concept of, well, insurance is in the risk transfer business, right? And how some of the approaches to disasters, particularly, actually disincentivizes risk reduction. And so, really thinking about, how these things play together. And so, for our next roundtable coming up next year, our topics that we're proposing are going to be financing and insurance around resilience and disasters. What we are looking for right now is to help, from any of you, recommendations to help us identify representatives from those industries that we can invite to participate. We have some folks that we know of, but would certainly love to hear from all of you. We particularly would love to hear from folks who work in this region. We work nationwide, and so a lot of our contacts are not necessarily from the Southeast or from the region from SCDRP. So we would love to bring people in from insurance and financing that actually have experience in the Southeast. And so I would love to hear from any of you about recommendations of who needs to be part of that discussion. And certainly reach out to us if you would like to be part of that discussion. Like I said at the outset, these are invite-only roundtables. We do have limited space. And so limited space because we want to be able to facilitate the best conversation, and that gets difficult to do with too many people in the room, and limited space because we have to find the facility to do so. So we typically work with Heather to help us put together an invite list and secure what would be the best venue for the discussion. And so with that, what I'd like to do is give a few minutes for questions, both and also I see there are several of you on this call that attended the roundtable. So if you would like to share your experience about the roundtable or any thoughts you have about the roundtable, perhaps things you'd like to see us do in the future or do differently, now's your chance. I would love to hear some feedback from all of you too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ashley and Jessica. I feel like you just walked us around the tip of an iceberg. There really is a lot more discussion to take place. Let's open it up for questions. Folks, you can write your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your virtual hand or physical hand if I can see you. And please ask your questions now.
Oh, so Dan says he has to go. Thanks, Dan.
Nice to see you.
I want to circle back to as we're waiting for people to put more questions in. There was a question about, means testing financing to communities, and something for this group to think about is how financing entities could be encouraged to use other metrics. And that is, in fact, what came up in the roundtable is, but what are those other metrics, and what are sort of the challenges around other metrics? There's pluses, positive and negatives to each kind of metric like this. So we want to, I think one of the things we want to make space for is to talk through not just the recognition that there need to be different metrics, but also helping us identify the potential for what those metrics should be instead. Let's see. Rick says, much of the disaster insurance available for homeowners is publicly provided, so you might consider including them in your future conversations. Thanks, Rick. So this has been part of the insurance conversation, and even though we scratched the surface of this in the roundtable, but in the larger Aspen Institute roundtable, this really came up with respect to the role of insurance and even public insurance. And the fact that the current public program is in such financial straits, and so what are sort of the ways in which we can resolve this? Now, one of the ways in which subsidizing. So here's a perfect example. I'll bring this up, and this has come up several times. But okay, so when a federal agency is able to come in and secure uninsured losses or pay for uninsured losses. That actually is a mechanism for disincentivizing people to properly insure their property. And this is not about, actually, this is not mostly community members, individuals, private. This is governments. The biggest uninsured loss in disaster recovery is actually public buildings. And so what we're seeing is um, public, local governments and state governments not adequately insuring their own properties because they understand or believe that the federal government programs will come in and restore those properties once they've been damaged. So that's an example of how some of the programs that we have actually disincentivize resilience, investment in resilience. And so really thinking through what that means and how we navigate that. Let's see. Following on to the findings just shared, I want to share a new resource on Digital Coast. Oh, thanks, Heidi. A topics page on funding and financing resilience work. I'll definitely take a look at that. Thank you so much.
And everyone, please keep in mind that we will download the chat after the meeting today, and I will make sure to forward any additional questions or resources to both Ashley and Jessica. And any other additional resources that you share, we will put in our next newsletter. If no one else has any other questions, I think I will move on to a few more items to round out our hour. Thank you so much, Ashley and Jessica, for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Okay, just a few more announcements before we run out of time. Just a couple happenings. First of all, today is the last day to sign up for SCDRP committees. So these are the three I want to take a quick look at. The Governance Committee. First, is responsible for further developing rules, policies, procedures, and elections. The Governance Committee will be chaired by Veteran Advisory Board member Rick DeVoe from the College of Charleston. Hi, Rick. Please let us know if you would like to join the Governance Committee, particularly if you have experience in nonprofit governance. Partnership Committee. This one connects SCDRP to organizations, develops joint efforts and initiatives between our partners, and helps identify our monthly speakers. We have two co-chairs for the Partnership Committee, our seasoned advisory board member, Gino Olmi from NOAA, and our new advisory board member, Amanda Guthrie from South Carolina Sea Grant. So if you feel that the partnership needs more representation from a certain sector, a line of work, or a geographic location, please join our partnership committee and help us fill out our membership to better meet our mission. The Development Committee. This one solicits and generates financial resources to sustain SCDRP. We are extremely grateful to our new advisory board member, Randall Matthews, from Chatham Emergency Management in Georgia, for stepping forward to lead the Development Committee. So if you have an interest in how SCDRP receives and sustains funding in the future, please join the Development Committee. Our next virtual monthly partnership meeting is scheduled for April 27th. Same place, same time. And I'm very excited to announce that our super speaker next month will be Wazim Mola, the Associate Director of the Caribbean Initiative from the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsh Latin America Center. So Mr. Mola will join us from Washington, D.C. and provide us with a status update of PAC 2030, the U.S. Caribbean Partnership to Address the Climate Crisis 2030. Are you an ideas machine? Do you have project ideas? Please scan this QR code and submit your project sketches. And speaking of funding opportunities, it's time to move on to some partner sharing. Our advisory board chair, Lindy Betzel, is traveling today, but she wanted to make sure that I remind all of you that the National Coastal Resilience Fund 2023 request for proposals is open and is sneaking up fast. The pre-proposal due date is April 12th. The full proposal invitations will come out towards the end of May, And then the full proposals, which are by invite only, will be due June 28th. Does anyone have any additional announcements to share? You can either raise your hand or drop them in the chat box. Thank you. Thank you, Heidi, for posting the link to the National Coastal Resilience Fund. Perfect. Perfect. We have a few minutes if anyone wants to add anything. Otherwise, Francisco, I see your hand is up. Francisco, please turn off your mic.
Good morning. I want to thank everybody for coming, as well as all the valuable information that's been provided today. One of the things that I've been researching in line with the climate resiliency, we tend to focus more in the international sector. I noticed that USAID is offering an APS, and it's the Climate Smart Disaster Ready annual program fund. And they're doing the rounds. I think it's closing March 31st, but there'll be other rounds coming up. So that might be some location where you could do some research and try to access some funds. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Francisco. I saw another hand. Patty Pellington.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Oh, okay, great.
Yes,
I'm
I
seeing
can
some
hear
head
you.
nods. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm seeing some head nods, so I'll take that as a yes. Hi, everyone. Patty Pellingen, Program Coordinator of the Institute for Sustainable Development, or ISD for short. I wanted to put it out there that we recently released a report about the blue economy. It's called Building the Blue Innovation Pipeline, Lessons Learned from. So this focus actually has, or this report is actually focused on the US and Sweden, but we have a lot of good research in there about the blue economy, water, coastal, blue innovation. And the ultimate thesis of it is how we need to put more investment into blue economy research, R&D, and innovation. And even though it has that focus on the US and Sweden, those recommendations and that research is widely applicable. And I'm definitely mentioning it here, given the role that, the Southeastern Caribbean, given those integral roles of water resilience, climate resilience, the water and coastal economies, ocean economies, lots of different words that I just said that essentially point at the same thing. But for anyone interested in kind of learning about that and checking it out, I'll put a link in the chat where you can download the report for free. Check out the press release and the executive summary that kind of give you the big hit points of it. And I'll put my contact info in there as well if anyone has any other questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patty. So guys, please send additional resources and updates. I see them flowing in the chat box. Awesome, guys, because you recognize we're running out of time. We will consolidate these and put these in our new next newsletter. Fantastic. Thank you. I just want to say this concludes our March monthly partnership meeting. Email us if you would like to join a committee or share another announcement. Thank you for joining us today and your continued contributions to the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership. We look forward to seeing you all again on April 27th. Thanks again and have a great day.